Good afternoon, everybody. Ryan Leary here from Recruiting Daily. We're going to hang tight for just a few moments as we kick off. We're going to run through a couple of housekeeping items. As people start to join into the session today, the session is titled Memo to Recruiting Leaders. Your recruiting process is broken. And of course, you can see sponsored by Olio. So I want to thank the team at Olio for bringing this webinar to everybody. We have a couple of strong presenters today, so I think you all are going to have a great session and enjoy this. And the presenters for today, you probably already know these people. If you don't, you should. We've got Jeanette, and Jeanette, I'm going to butcher your name for years. I've been doing this, and I apologize. Meister, is that right?
Maister, like the month of May.
Maister, I know. I've been doing this, God, for probably a decade already. Anyhow, Jeanette is with Olio. She is their managing director of Americas, and she's an amazing human. So if you don't know her, send her a message, connect with her on LinkedIn. She's going to take you for a good ride. And of course, you probably all know or have been affected or touched in a bad way by William at some point in your life in this space. And of course, William is president here over at Recruiting Daily. So these are going to be your speakers today, and it's going to be a great session. But before we get started today, I do want to walk you all through some housekeeping items for today. If you have never been on a webinar, the rules are simple. We have everybody on mute because we have a lot of people on the call. So you will be able to ask questions, and we want you to. We want this to be a very interactive session. So on the right-hand side of your screen, you're going to see a panel. Go ahead and enter any questions in there that you want. We will moderate those questions. We're going to try to get them in during the call when they're relevant. But if we can't, we will get them at the end. We will have a formal Q&A session towards the end of the call. And so definitely don't be shy. For those of you wondering, yes, we are recording the session, and after the webinar, you will get a set of resources and things that we're going to give you as well as Olio, and you will also get a link direct to the recording, so you will have that. If you're taking notes, take notes, but we will get you the recording, and of course, if you want to share this out, let people know you're listening or you hear any good nuggets, please do so socially. Throughout the webinar today, we will launch a couple of polls. So when we launch those, please answer those questions. That's going to help drive some of the content and conversation for today. So with that, I think it's time to get started. Tincup, you ready? Jeanette, you ready?
Absolutely.
Ready.
All right. Well, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to pass it off to you guys.
So, Jeanette, why don't you start with first what you see, and then obviously it's more challenging than before. And the numbers just came out this morning, another 5 million filed for unemployment. So that's now I think 20 plus million for unemployment. So obviously this is recruiting is more challenging than ever before because it's changed. We went to if we think about the economics, basic economics, we went from a candidate-driven market to now an employer-driven market, like in 3 months. That all happened. So why don't you take us into these three, and I'll add some color.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's such a great point. It doesn't even feel like it switched from the candidate to employer side in 3 months. It feels like it was just on a dime in 2 seconds. And, I'm sure many of us on today are experiencing that in different ways. So you may, depending on your organization, things are slowing down, or, freezes are happening, or, a number of organizations are having the opposite, where, there is a mad rush to hire more faster than ever. And there was actually a really interesting article, I think it was the Journal today, talking about how CVS Health was partnering with a number of organizations that were actually slowing down and didn't have a need for some of their workers, and creating some interesting talent pools to try and shift people from one organization to another. So very fast-paced, changing workforce needs. We're all experiencing that. And trying to figure out where we're going to be, certainly in let alone a month, let alone 3 months, 6 months. So it's a challenging time. One thing that certainly has not changed, and a number of us have been doing this for more than a decade, if not longer. I won't date myself, but remembering back to the early 2000s this has not changed. Our recruiters and recruiting teams, they're still overburdened. It's a recurring issue. We have lots of candidates applying for roles. There's a lot of steps to complete. And, what's interesting, and this is going to certainly, we don't have like real-time data, I'd be interested, is that applications for roles over the past 2 years have doubled. Now that's pre-coronavirus survey results, but it can only increase as those organizations, it becomes more of an employer standpoint. And it takes we did some survey, 91 steps to bring someone on to an organization. So it's more intense there. And
and it's going to be more intense because you're going to get more people to apply. When one of the things we learned about, we won't go back, more than, let's say, 2 recessions. But one of the things we learned during the crisis of 08 to 10 is that the spray and pray method of candidates created a dearth of volume, which actually made the job even harder, because now instead of getting, let's say, 1,000 resumes for a job, you're getting 15,000. And to go through that, you need to have more automation and more efficiency, and to be able to get through those, wade through those to get to the, let's say, 100 and there's 20, however you're going to factor that in, because you're going to get more resumes. So now when you're in a candidate driven market like we were in December, it was so much of an emphasis was placed on sourcing. Like, we had to really go find people, and it was hard. There was lots of technology, great technology out there to go find people. Now the finding people, still challenging. Well, let's not dismiss that, but the finding people isn't as hard as now. You're going to have 100x applications. Now what do you do?
Absolutely. And as you're saying, talking about 08, I had a little flashback. For those who know my background, I actually was at Lehman Brothers at the time until the very, very end. So those who are watching the news who are around then might have seen me on TV carrying my boxes out. And I literally remember sending out my resume everywhere. So that spray and pray, it was certainly, resonate. And we're back. We're back to that. And how do you wade through to find those top candidates? It's in an intense environment where everyone's a little more stressed than normal. So it's absolutely, we're all overburdened.
The overburdened part for me is we had gotten to a place during that time where you have to do more with less. I remember people actually using the phrase, the new normal, and we've used that historically at different points, but during that crisis and after that crisis, we talked about the new normal of basically, if you had 10 recruiters, now you have 5. You have to still do the same job, or even the job has become more challenging.
Yep.
But right. But now this is your new normal. Well, now there's even a different normal, if we want to even say that, with COVID, and so now this new normal is redefined, in that you're going to get more. You're going to have to do more with less again, and you're going to have an influx of more active candidates. And maybe even passive candidates, but you're going to have an influx of both.
Absolutely. I think what's interesting is we look at the last box over there, business expectations for diversity and inclusion. Mm-hmm. That's not changing. That's not going away. And if anything, that's from talking to lots of different people over the past few weeks, that is still a hot topic and an important part of CHRO's agendas.
It seems like we made great strides here. And again, this could be just perception wise, because we're talking about it more in the last couple of years. The gender equity in general, diversity and inclusion, belonging, equity, equality, and more in general, but just these issues have become more mainstream and more popularized, which is fantastic. It seems, and again, I don't know this to be true. It just seems like we've made strides. So let's not, I could be completely wrong. We might not have made any strides, and it just feels like we've been talking about it more. Okay, fair enough. But what I fear is that when 20 million people that got laid off, if we did make those strides, are we going to regress? Are we going to fall backwards? The initiatives will still be important. I think you're dead on with that. I don't think that's going to change. But during this, layoffs, let's say, when you riff 10,000 employees, are you looking through the lens of D&I? Are you looking through the lens of gender equity? Are you looking through this lens to make it proportionate, if you will, so that on the other side of this, we don't have to start over. We can just continue and keep pushing and get better.
Exactly. Actually, that's a perfect lead in. I think we have a poll right now asking everyone questions about their challenges. So maybe we'll get some live, top recruiting concerns. I'm getting some notes on what our poll is. So why don't we kick that off?
I love polls.
Let's hear what some of your challenges are right now, knowing that probably changed from a few months ago. Ooh, there we go. We can see all the numbers.
Two things. One thing, there's 500 people or whatever on the webinar. One of the things I would say is the webinars like this are really driven by y'all. By and large, they're driven by, and they're the quality of the webinars, not just the presenters and the conversation, but polls. This is where we can kind of change and pivot some of the conversations to things that y'all care about. Y'all is a Texas colloquialism, by the way, a combination of you and all.
I won't hold it against you as a New Yorker.
just in case you're not familiar with the term. Anyhow, so y'all can help us with polls, but secondly, we didn't mention it as aggressively as we normally do, but ask questions. Ryan's actually on the back end monitoring questions, and at any point he'll break in when he sees something really awesome. So please, these are for you. So please ask questions. Oh.
Perfect. Oh, interesting.
Oh my, I wouldn't have bet on that. Okay.
It's like a high score. Still the combination of attracting the right candidates, but then keeping them engaged during the increase.
Okay, I got one on the 59%. So first of all, thank you, everyone. Appreciate you. I was talking to a CEO yesterday, and one of the bits of advice he gave me for all of his clients was basically go into your ATS, close out every job that you're not hiring for. Just close them out. And communicate with every single candidate. That job was going to get filled. COVID froze it. It's still frozen. We still want to talk to you. We will talk to you the moment that it becomes unfrozen. But this isn't the time to have a bunch of jobs out there that you're not going to fill. So his advice, which I think is actually really sound, advice for folks with their ATS is just if you got jobs out there, let's say, there are 3 or 4 jobs that you're hiring for, but the other 15 or so, you're not, take the 15 down. Just take them down, communicate to all of those candidates, and just make sure, because this is actually this is a time when you can be more humane with candidates, letting them know, communicate and letting them know exactly what's going on. They're more apt, if you'd let them know what's going on, they're more apt to actually be engaged. It's that not knowing. I applied to the job. Is it a real job or is it a fake job? It is, one of those types of things. So on the 59%, I think that's just good advice.
Absolutely. I would actually take that one step further if you have the time to go through and see those who have applied already where it's a frozen job. If you can pick out those top candidates, really top ones, really personalize that. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more down the road, but in the webinar. But really, if you can, keep them warm, personalize the process, send them, specific content that will go a long way. Absolutely, in this interesting environment.
Yeah, it's stuff that we should do all the time, right? These are micro experiences where we should be communicating all the time with our candidates, but especially people that are further in the pipeline. So, people that just see a job and go, wow, I I could do that. I have great experience. I could do this job. They apply, done. Then there's the folks that are already 5 steps in. They've already done a team interview. They've already done your assessments. They're like literally knocking on the door. You've got it down to 3 candidates. Job gets frozen. Happens all the time. And during, a global pandemic, it also happens. Not shocking. With those folks, I think Jeanette, I think it's spot on. I think you pick up the phone. I think this is not an email or a text. This is like this is probably one of those things that has to be, hey, you were really far. You and 2 other candidates are there. Job got frozen, and there's nothing we can do to make it unfrozen. But the moment it is, you will literally be my first 3 calls. So, I know you have to do things in the interim, or what you ever have to do, but like that type of communication, again, with everyone in your pipeline, regardless of where they are. But I think the way you look at it is how much more personalized becomes, like where you are in the process.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that tailoring, depending on that process, depending on whether it's the candidate profile, the role, whatever situation, whatever it is, it's again, we have it on the slide. This one size fits all. Like, don't do that. Like, definitely take into account the situation and who and what job it is, where it is in your organization, and you can do some things differently. Really, really tailor it. It's key, which, and, to me, what I think is interesting is just, William, you alluded to it, where it's, in normal times, we certainly believe at Olio, but it's critical to, tailor, like have different workflows for the best results. And so in this situation, that's even more important. But the way, a top talent, someone, a really hard to fill role, you're going to want to have a different type of a workflow for them versus, returning seasonal workers, as an example. Super, super different. And so you'll have a better outcome that way. So I mean, to me, when I think about seasonal workers as an example, we have one customer now, obviously a little bit different with stores closed, but it's a retail customer that just has a system set up when it comes to the holiday season. Automatically, if they've worked for the organization before, they just go on apply. Like, they have a super short application, recognizes who they are, they'll have an offer, 5 minutes, can start the next day. So different process versus someone new that's applying. Versus, some other roles. I was talking to an organization, they call these roles lights out roles, which no interview is required. These tends to be like heavy distribution type of roles, or drivers, where you don't need a face-to-face interview. So you'd want to have a very different workflow process if you have that sort of organization, but then you have other types of jobs that, don't fit into that. And so, this organization, they need a lot of drivers, which is actually more intense now. And they just, when someone applies, they just need to know, does this person have a driver's license? And, are they not a felon? Beyond that, they don't really need anything else. And if they pass that, they're hired, like instantly. No face-to-face interview. It's just go, show up the next day, start.
Oh, I have a story from one of my friends that's at Twitter that he had, and this was a couple of years ago, but he had hired a person sight unseen. So he went to one of his top engineers and basically said, "Who have you always wanted to work with? What's the project? What do you think they should make? Give me their email address and their cell number." And he literally reached out with an offer letter. Janet wants to work with you. She wants to build this with you. She thinks that you should be making about this. That's negotiable. This is an offer letter. Like it was that crazy. He hadn't talked to the person. He hadn't qualified, none of that stuff.
I love that. So, I mean, you talk about like a tailored, workflow for like a top talent. If you actually started doing that, I mean, that's really powerful.
It was powerful to me because I was like, you didn't talk to him? I talked to him, he's looking at me, and we're having lunch at Twitter, and he's just like, yeah, I talked to him like down the process, but like he had already said yes. I'm like, I don't even know how to put this in my brain. One thing,
the trust, right? The trust of your people, just like sign cultural standpoint, if you trust the people you work with, and and knowing if they know your organization, if they've worked with someone they know it, like that's great.
Yeah, and we all have people that we'd love to work with, like in our networks, people that we've always wanted to do something with, and so we all have that, and it's just an under-leveraged thing. But I want to go backwards just real quick because I got asked, offline by a friend of ours, why would we be doing process-related webinar during in the midst of COVID, and the reason is kind of simple. You've got on one side of things, you've got a lot of chaos, and you've got people that are worried about their jobs, and you've got freeze, and you've got all these other things. And then there's a contingent of folks, from sourcers to hiring managers, everybody in TA, that actually thinks of this as an opportunity. They look at the silver lining. Of course, it's all negative, but they look at the silver lining. They say, in December, we weren't as fast as our candidates. That's just true. We couldn't get to the candidates as fast. They'd already made decisions, et cetera. And so they're using this as a moment. That's why it's important for us to talk about process now, because if we would have had let's just face it, if we would have had a webinar on process in November, not sure a lot of folks, because of how busy and how underwater they were, not sure that people could even handle a webinar about process. But recruiters are constantly trying to figure out the relationship between price, quality, and speed, and how to fix those things, both in people and technology and in process. And so this one's really mostly about process. And so if you're questioning, like, why would we be talking about this now? There is a group of talent acquisition folks out there that this is the perfect time to fix things. And so this webinar is dedicated, it's for them.
Absolutely. I'm glad you actually put that out there, because we were talking about that, was it last week, where, sometimes we just want to focus on, we have some time now, let's, the bus isn't running on some of our organizations, so let's just clean it up, fix it, get it ready, all nice and shiny for when it's time to start running again. It's
and there's no shame and no guilt for folks that can't. I was talking to a person earlier in the week that they're taking care of their parents and grandparents. Okay, so they can't be, they're not going to be focused on process. They're not going to be focused on fixing things. They're going to do the best they can with the job they can, and their focus is elsewhere. Like, no shame. Like, that's not the purpose.
100%.
We want to make sure that we put content in front of folks that helps them. And like, when we look at this slide, as we're looking at it, when tailoring, your outreach to folks, now's the time. If you feel like you haven't been great at that because of for whatever reason, in November and December and before, now's the time to then go, okay, well, if we weren't doing it this way, how would we do it?
Yeah.
And it's just a wonderful, if you think of the positive, again, we're surrounded with the negative, but if you think of the positive, then you can really kind of start to think of, okay, we have a bunch of people in the pipeline. Now, what do we do with them that we couldn't or wouldn't do before? How can we do this differently?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely, which is a nice segue into this slide, which, it's about, we have here, protecting relationships with unqualified candidates, which I just love that word and term. It's, versus sort of these casual candidates. And I think it's an interesting thing where probably a number of people are getting a lot of applications for those open jobs from unqualified applicants. And if you have a brand that's certainly a consumer brand, you want to obviously maintain a great candidate experience regardless, even though it is more of an employer driven market right now. So that's really, really key to do that. On the flip side, how do you wade through everything to find those, top candidates and then really get them in fast if you are doing those hiring right now, or keeping them warm until you're ready to open that up and really get them in the door. And there is a difference between, you know, doing both, and it takes a little bit of time to think through that.
Tactically, Jeanette, how do you see people using, I mean, we'll say Olio, but you know, obviously other technologies as well. How do you see people doing this tactically?
Yeah, I mean, Allison, I'm like such a tech geek. So to me, there's so many ways to solve this through tech, but it's a lot of automation, and it can be done, you know, two ways, like very, you know, templated, nice, you know, nice respond email, even what you just said, William, earlier on, where it's the ones that are unqualified, you know, have some of these, you know, even if it's a nice email to them where it's like, you know, thanks, but no thanks, or we're not hiring, or whatever it is, but being transparent. I think the key is being transparent. You can send out those communications to candidates via email. So a lot of automation. So email is one we all like understand easily. So that's sort of that simple way to do it. It's, you know, technology can quickly identify who those top candidates are, you know, whether it's like through, you know, some sort of, you know, scoring mechanism that you've, you know, baked into your tech to say what, you know, what data defines a top candidate, to bubble them up so you can easily see in your tech, oh, these are the top candidates. These are the ones that, you know what, we have a hiring freeze, but I see these candidates right now would be amazing. Let me pick up the phone.
Yeah.
So you know, to your point, pick up the phone for the time, even if you haven't talked to them. Hey, we're on a freeze. You look really great. You know, we think this could be great. Whatever. Here's where we're at. So you can, again, using the tech to just really like make the recruiter's life easier.
Yeah, everyone wants to feel wanted.
Yes.
You know, regardless of where you come from or what you do. So everyone wants to, we desire that. So the reach out to folks, especially folks that you know would be great if circumstances were different. This is now that moment of, you know, again, you can do it through text, you can do it through email, you can do it in a lot of different ways, and it could be personalized to the person. Like, hey, listen, I know that we've text back and forth. I'd love to talk with you if you got a moment. You know, I want to tell you what's going on, or I can just put it here and I can text you what's going on. Like, it doesn't, you know, let me fit around you and your needs, which I think is something we would like to do, or would like to have done in 19, where we would basically meet candidates where they are. And but it was harder in 19 because of the speed in which we had to go, the rapidity in which we had to communicate with candidates, and finding candidates was so much harder. So now we can, if we can leverage this moment in a positive way, now we can actually look at those top candidates, you know, the right side of the slide, and really treat them, you know, like the superstars that they are. Reaching out to them and just saying, hey, I want to have a conversation. I want to tell you where the job is. I want to tell you how much I love what you've done and how I think you'd be a rock star here. And, you know, this too shall pass, but we're going to get on the other side of it. And we would be honored to work with you and have you work with us. So we're going to continue the conversation, you know, and extend that friendship, relationship, extend that, even though it's not going to happen this week, it is going to happen. And I think it's one of the, you know, the best parts of the slide is like communing with people. You can't over communicate with candidates at this particular point. I don't, I'd like someone to prove me wrong on that, by the way. That might be a challenge that I throw out to somebody, and get a candidate to then tell me that they've been over communicated to. But I don't believe in my heart that you can over communicate with a candidate. And Jeanette, did we have another poll that we want to launch?
I think we're going to do it after this slide, if my notes are correct.
Well, this is the chaos that actually I often.
So like, why are we doing a poll?
I often talk about HR in this way. Like, people are always, you know, they ask me, you know, William, why doesn't HR get this or do this, that, and the other? And it's like, well, if you've ever worked in HR, you typically 80% of your week, maybe even 90% of your week is fighting fires. It's literally you come in, there's been a sexual harassment claim, now that you have to put an investigation together, the union doesn't, wants to renegotiate their contract, like chaos. And so HR professionals go from literally fire to fire to fire to fire, and they don't get to fix some of the strategic things that they want to, that they even know that they need to fix. Like they know some of the problems that they need to fix and can't get to it because they just don't have the time. Recruiters, especially in a candidate-driven market, again, you can look back through through history where we've had a candidate-driven market. The recruiters didn't have time. I mean, I actually talked to somebody, I think it was in October, when I was at a conference, and they're like, literally, I'm working 7 days a week. Like I can't, I can't be off. Like there's no off. If somebody wants to talk to me on Sunday night, I can't push that to, okay, how about Tuesday? No, I got to have the phone call on Sunday night or they're gone. So, that was then, this is now. And we recognize, with the pandemic that, okay, maybe you're not fighting those fires, but essentially you still are fighting some fires.
Absolutely. And again, I think, we know like there are organizations right now that, have announced that they're hiring, their hiring needs are so critical right now. I think it was Amazon, they're hiring was 75,000 or was it 150? I feel like the numbers change constantly. The CVS Health that I mentioned in the journal today. So, those recruiting teams are, under the gun, and they are just, drinking water from a fire. So keep going with this analogy. Whereas, again, other organizations, it's again, a smidge of a breather, but there's still that admin burden that remains for any open roles.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Some folks.
Yeah, I just think even like scheduling interviewers. It's just, I remember years ago, again, I'll go back to my Lehman days since we just talked about that before, of just having people sit there and schedule candidates, and that was their full-time job. And what's so interesting is Aptitude Partners did a recent survey, and the results that they found was over 60% of large enterprises have large full-time interview schedulers. So it's like, it went back to like, pre-08, that hasn't changed. So there's a lot, and there's some ways that there's a lot of room for improvement, I should say.
Yeah. Something else to mention here is that as a community, you've gone from some firms that were you talk to some of the Silicon Valley tech firms, and you talk to the TA staffs, the crazy stories that you'd hear there, and then all of a sudden, okay, I talked to a firm this week that basically said they're not gonna let anybody go. So they've agreed as a board, as a company, that they're not going to let anybody go. They'll redeploy them. So like their office manager is now doing, customer support or doing something different. So, but they'll redeploy them. So recruiting now has a different challenge, has a different fire to fight. And the community in which that recruiter is amongst is they're hearing stories daily of sourcers that they know, other talent acquisition professionals being furloughed and things like that. So they've also got this other emotional fire that they're fighting of their friends, right? And then you've got what you just highlighted, which I think is genius, is that, and now you've got some other industries and some other companies that manufacturing, like if you were manufacturing masks before this, like your world. Well, we were talking about Zoom prior to the call. Like, look at Zoom's operation prior to COVID, and now look at Zoom's operation. Like, it's got to be crazy at Zoom as a talent acquisition, as an HR, as a talent acquisition professional, just to be able to staff, because capacity just went through the roof, and it shows no signs of slowing down. And so then you've got a different fire, people that were kind of, had a pitter patter to their day, had a pitter patter to their week, knew what they were hiring for. And then all of a sudden, boom, fire hose. now you have to actually go hire, 1,000 engineers. That's a different fire.
Absolutely. And it's like, ooh, how do you do that? And I was like, well, automation can really help there, that way. It's hard to, from a human standpoint, to all of a sudden have your numbers increase that dramatically. How do you pump up that volume fast? It's intense. I think we have a poll question that actually would lead right into that. So
Okay.
throw that puppy up. So out of curiosity, just thinking about that for those on, what recruiting tasks are you automating today?
Okay, so same rules apply as the last poll. This is all on y'all. Please click on the poll and also click on the questions thing and put questions in there. Ryan's looking at those. And he'll interrupt us. And we also have a Q&A page that we'll get to as well. But please ask questions and please.
We do have some questions now if you want to.
Oh, yeah.
Answer a few of those.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Jeanette and I are ready.
We'll just keep talking.
She put a note on her door so that her family won't come into the office. So she's ready.
I did.
I did the same.
Check
it out. Your dad is on a call. Please don't come in. Work has changed forever. Anyhow, Ryan, what do you got, brother?
All right, let's do one question now. With so many candidates looking for employment now, would it seem okay to leave positions up and just have a note on the posting that the hiring would not happen until June or July?
I have an answer. Jeanette, you want to go first?
Yeah, I have one too. Yeah, it's a really good question. So of course, part of me would say it depends on the type of job. And the reason I'm saying it depends is I think the number one thing to do here is be transparent. So I love that idea of, okay, being transparent, put on, hey, we're not going to be hiring until June or July. Transparency is key. If you think it's one of these jobs where you're going to be, inundated with like hundreds of thousands of applications, you may not want to put it up. But if it's a job that's a really, specialized skill that's really difficult to hire for, then I would say for sure, put it up there with the caveat, we're not even going to be like looking or touching or talking to anyone until June or July, but we're accepting applications now. So it's one of those, like, it depends because it's nuanced, but I love the idea of being transparent. So that's how I would answer it.
Thanks to everyone with the answer to the poll. Really appreciate it. I think if you keep the post live, if you decide to keep the post live, everything that Jeanette said, and then let's say you keep the post live, what I would suggest is put this text 3 times in the job position. So, and because, we all do the same thing, we scan through something, it's like we read what we wanted to read, right? So we'll start the hiring process in July, on July 1st or in July, however you want to phrase that. But literally put it at the beginning of the job description, in the middle of the job description, and at the end of the job description. 3 different places, and I'm not kidding about that, and bold it.
I agree.
So that people literally understand that you're not even going to start the hiring process. You're putting it up because you will hire for it, but you're not going to start the hiring process. I love the transparency and communication, 100%, and let people know as specifically as you can. And you know what? If it has to be modified, and you have it up there, and it's because there's a lot of things we don't know. So if it's July 1st and you get towards July and it's not going to be July 1st, then you can easily communicate with those candidates that have applied and say, hey, you've applied to a job that we thought we would start the hiring process in July 1st. It's now September 1st. So just letting you know that, and you change the job post. Now and you can you can communicate that, hey, we were hiring for this job in December, And we are going to hire for this job. This job is important to us. It's the timing in which we start the hiring process. So we want to set expectations, and then we want to, it's that old game in consulting of setting expectations and over delivering rather than under delivering. Same thing in recruiting. We want to be able to communicate with them and give them a realistic picture of when we think we're going to do it. And then if that changes, which it could change tomorrow. If that changes, then change it, and then communicate with those that have applied. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Great question.
That is a great question. I'm looking at the selecting candidates for interview. Yeah, I can see that being low. I can see that. Scheduling interviews. How much of scheduling interviews now for y'all is technology, is Calendly or something like some type of scheduling tool?
I mean, it's amazing. We have vast majority of our customers are just like, it's completely automated through our it's just makes it easy, especially that high volume. But it's interesting that 30% schedule and interviewing. The Aptitude Research Partners stat I said earlier, where they have 60% of large enterprises have schedulers. Only 20% of the enterprises surveyed use automation for scheduling interviewers. So
that's crazy to me.
This is interesting. Like the stat, it's small. They're 10% difference, but close, not too far.
By the way, for those that are listening, Aptitude, it's Madeline Lorano, and she has been in the industry for, well, we'll just say she has studied the industry for a while, and she's really, really talented, knows a lot about technology and the industry. So you should definitely follow her, on Twitter and everywhere else. But her research is always solid. Just believe in it. The scheduling interview thing for me is what's interesting about it is there's technology out there that not only can automate that whole process, but can, with machine learning, can go through your calendar, their calendar, and find openings and place a calendar event and schedule it for multiple people. Like that, it can be completely automated.
Totally. On the candidate side too. I mean,
yes.
It's incredible. It's even for like these big, no one's doing it right now in person per se. I have to assume a lot of stuff is virtual. But even for virtual interview days, where a candidate has to meet with a number of people and go through a rotation of meeting 3-4 people. Now it's being done virtually. Just the whole thing, just completely automated.
Jeanette, do you think work from home, like this whole experience and how it potentially will change the future of work, do you think interviews will be conducted kind of in the same way? Will we go back to the hiring manager team interview? You come into the office, like all of that typical stuff that we've done. Do you think interviews are just going to be fundamentally changed going forward, or what's your take?
I do. I think. I mean, the bigger picture is like work in general is going to be totally fundamentally changed. I think, having everyone in one office and being together, all of that. So I think people will, we're seeing it, obviously we're all craving in-person attention. Like, let's be clear, we all want to like see people in person, but, we can be effective virtually. And so there is that balance where, I don't think it will ever go back. I think we're in a new norm. And I say that also because, what we've actually done at Olio, we hired our global head of marketing completely virtually before all of this hit. She sits in Vancouver. Our CEO sits in London. I sit in New York. We never met each other in person. We did the whole thing virtually. Big, executive leadership job. So I think that will become more of the norm. And I think people will start to, really see, because we're going to have to do this virtually, where you can hire the best talent. It doesn't matter where they sit. So what roles can really be virtual or semi-virtual? doesn't matter where someone lives. So I think we're going to start to see all of this really change at a much faster pace than like now, given that we're in this crazy new norm versus I think we would have seen it. It's just would have been a much slower change over 10 years. It's going to be
a generation or two, and we would have eventually gotten there, but it would have taken a while.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by how 1099 folks are going to be entering more of the talent portfolio after this, because we figured out that now we can interact with these folks in a much different way. Well, why wouldn't we at that point? So thank you again for the poll. Thank you to the audience for answering the poll question. Appreciate you.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Okay, we're on to the next slide. So, I think it was interesting to see everyone's responses. Here's, some examples. We thought it would be helpful of how, certainly a number of Olio's clients are leveraging automation to help with that administrative burden. So it's interesting, we have here, posting to job boards. That was the #1 thing that's being automated with this group today, which is fascinating. But certainly the interview scheduling is down there. These big interview agendas and super days. The selection, only what was it, 14%, 17%. So those are these are some examples that automation can just take care of.
Yeah, it's an efficiency. It's you're essentially trying to eradicate where you can get faster, create a better experience at the same time. There's two things of note. One is there's a lot of bot discussions that are out there of where bots can actually help you in this process. And so, you want to keep that in the back of your mind and think about where in the process you can create an experience, because we're all accustomed to interacting and asking questions of bots now, thanks to Siri and everybody else. We're accustomed to asking questions and getting answers. Well, candidates are also accustomed to asking questions. Now, instead of them sending an email or filling out a form, they can actually ask a bot. On a lot of these, it's wayfinding. It's taking them through the process where they're at and letting them know what's coming next. So think of that as what efficiency can be gained by using bots. And the second, on the onboarding side, I've seen a great movement in pushing a lot of the onboarding prior to the first day of work. So take how much of that can be automated and brought further into recruiting, and not left to, okay, you've signed your offer letter, baton pass over to HR. Now they can do all the onboarding. Actually, we can push a lot of that further into recruiting and make sure that relationship is well done, so that they start off, and then it can be automated. A lot of it can be automated.
Absolutely. And I always like to say I think of automation of like two different types. There's that templated automation that's like, super easy. A lot of us have been using that for many years, but now the word automation is being used much more often. And then there's a data-driven automation, which is much more the machine learning and AI. And so both have their, both are good, and they have their place in this whole world of making things more efficient. So, and here, we skipped the slide ahead. So, this is just one example of, that we have data-driven insights. Companies that are using data to make decisions are 2 times as likely to improve the quality of hire. And for me, what I think is really critical is embedding it into the process. So not just having team have to rely and just figure it out, but just embedding it in. So here's an example. We have a little screenshot of, okay, a candidate has been recommended. They're 5-star candidate. Really simple to say, okay, this is someone we want to go after. Pick up that phone, if you will, for that top candidate. Make that call to them and say, hey, we're not hiring right now, but let's keep in touch. But having an example of, well, why is your system telling you that they're so great? and why were they selected for an interview, for example, if you've automated that step. So having the recruiter be able to see like why the automation, the data-driven automation has suggested they do something. And that's really important.
And this is what happens when you follow Jeanette. You get little to say because she's already said everything that you wanted to say. I've followed her on different stages, so I'm accustomed to this. The only thing I would add is at this point, it's data. This is actually a good time to cleanse your data. In fact, I talked to somebody last week where they pulled all of their data out of TA to cleanse it, and worked with different technologies to actually cleanse and refine their data and then put it back in. So again, garbage in, garbage out. We all know that. Putting your data to work, you still assumes that it's great data or it's good data.
Absolutely. And that's the key. I mean, that is so key, because if you don't have clean data, if you have it all over the place, if it's not, you know, if it doesn't make sense, you don't have it organized, forget it. So that's a real, I agree with that 110%. D&I.
Yeah, so one thing I'd ask folks to do, Fairy God Bars, which is based in New York, is a career platform for women, and Romy Newman is one of the co-founders, and she can give you like stacks of research around companies that are more diverse perform better, and she can quote study after study after study and give you more research. So if you need more stats, if you're building a business case or you're continuing a conversation with the C-suite, et cetera, the companies that are more focused on D&I perform better. Like, she can prove it for you. So if you have doubt, which, you know, if that's okay if you do, if you have doubt, she can actually settle that for you.
Absolutely, that's great. That's great. And we will, I think we said at the beginning, these slides are going out to everyone, or the recording, so you can see those stats that were there if you need some of those. And there were small little lines of where we sourced the information from. So FYI.
Yeah, I think you and I are both nervous on some level about what D&I looks like post-COVID, but I don't think it's just you and I. I think everybody on this call is thinking the same thing on some level. So, you know, we'll just have to evaluate where we are once we get through all this, and how we can continue the conversation and make more strides, et cetera. But we already know that it does lead to better performance. Now it's a matter of, okay, well, after, you know, COVID or post-COVID, you know, what are we dealing with? What, you know, I say, what mess are we dealing with? But what are we doing with at that point?
Absolutely. And it'll be interesting to see, as, you know, the stats come out, of how did the organizations with, you know, that were more diverse, did they fare, you know, versus the non-diverse ones. Like, to me, I think that'll be very interesting, because we have those stats to see, okay, yes, you know, more diverse organizations are more innovative, their stock prices tend to be higher versus the least diverse, you know. So after this, you know, it'll be interesting in a good way. So back to you know, data and automation. I mean, it's, to me, there's a really great way to focus on, you know, as we're fearful of this stuff and where things are going, to improve it in a really systematic way. And there's some, you know, relatively simple ways of, you know, some of us know this already, but you can take the jobs postings that, you know, for those who are hiring and hiring like crazy, you know, make sure those job postings, you know, there's a balance of gender words, gender charged words, if you will. We have, it was actually interesting. We have a customer that we have a tool that actually will look at the job postings and highlight any, you know, super male or super female type of words. And one of those heavy male words is strong. And they didn't realize they had a job posting up that used the word strong 13 times, and they didn't even realize.
Right.
And that, you know, unconsciously, you know, could be turning off women to even apply. So, you know, really easy to, you know, use tech to just, okay, let's, you know, automate, highlight, fix.
Yeah, Grammarly and Textio are great examples of tools that evaluate text and can help you kind of decouple a lot of that and understand the language that you use. For me, it's all kind of coming to grips with the biases that you have and understanding that everyone's littered with biases. Conscious or otherwise, that we have biases. Okay, now what do we do to protect the organization against those things, and how do we cope with those things, etc. So I like all of these suggestions, by the way.
Yeah, I think one interesting thing that I see used much more over in Europe and Asia, and not as much in the US, which I find interesting, is the second one, the blind screening. Some people will see that and they're like, what does that even mean? And it could be as simple as just covering up the name of on the resume or the application, and looking at that application without the name, and it makes a huge difference. So you know, I don't know if people have seen studies. You know, MIT and Chicago did, University of Chicago did that, and you know, huge difference of an unconscious bias against just, you know, what we might think about someone's name from an ethnicity standpoint. So there's simple stuff that can be done through data and automation.
So this is, for me, the story to the C-suite. It is important for recruiters now to really understand the story that they need to tell them, because the CEO wakes up thinking about talent, and then they pass that off and over to HR, to recruiting, and then they kind of get on with their business. To go back into the C-suite, the CFO, and sit down with them and have a discussion about data and metrics, not time to fill, not cost, not the traditional things, but quality. How do you get to quality? How do you understand the retention numbers and how you can affect that in recruiting, and be able to tell a story to a CFO that is data driven? And so the more apt, again, wherever you are in your career, the more apt you are to tell this story and to tell a financial story, a business story, the better. And again,
and just flipping back, I just want to highlight, there's this amazing book and website, storytellingwithdata.com. So it's a really terrific of how, you know, if you're not sure, you've never really, like, you need some help there, like, go get it, download to your Kindle, buy the hardcover, just go to the website. I would highly recommend. It's terrific. So, I mean, we're actually getting towards, we literally have 2 minutes, but I mean, I would say to, you know, to sum this all up, you know, for us at Olio, we realize there's just, with all the stuff we've been talking about, there's just a new generation of technology, which we call recruiting enablement. And it really, you know, it helps you do all these things, these challenges and issues and changing in the changing environment we're in. You know, it enables us to do
It's more with less. We already understand that pressure. Now we're going to get more candidate flow, and we're going to have to do more for less. So something's got to give. The good news is there's a great technologies out there that can actually help us with this.
Absolutely.
Ryan, do you have a question or two for us?
We do. Let's take a couple of questions and see if we can keep the answers brief and get more in.
He was talking to me. He was talking to me when he said that. Direct him to one of us.
Direct it to you. I know there are so many. It's a little story here, so I'll read the whole thing. I know there are so many unemployed people right now who have to prove they are looking for work. This is making it hard, as I'm getting resumes that have nothing to do with what we do. I hire accountants only, but getting applications from servers, dental hygienists, flight attendants, etc., with no accounting experience or accounting education. Any tips for really attracting the right candidates right now? I get about 30 to 40 applications a day, but maybe about 10 that I can actually use. Also, when sourcing, I am finding great candidates, but many people are scared to leave their current job right now, which is understandable. Any tips on really letting candidates know how stable your company is during these times?
Jeanette?
Well, that is, I'm digesting. There's a lot there. I'm going to go with the last part and answer the last part around the stability, because I think that that's a really interesting point, because, for companies that literally are hiring, and, trying to get someone who's in a job, I mean, that's always a challenge. What I think is interesting is providing some of that key financial data to them to explain why you're so stable. So if, for example, your business has, your revenue is, whatever, 80%, recurring subscription type of revenue, where like people have signed, 5-year contracts where they're, going to be paying, and the type of customer base that you work with is more manufacturing, that like, I would like really lay it out that way, to make that candidate understand, well, here's why. Because obviously for someone just to hear, yeah, we have a stable company, it's, sort of prove it. So I would literally like have that, whether one pager, of why you're so stable, like it pretty detailed as well. I think that would help and go a long way to making someone feel comfortable to jump. And the fact of the matter is, if they're not willing to do it now, things may change in a few months if you haven't found someone, so I think keeping that dialogue going, but being very specific, and more specific you can be, the better. William, you want to take some of the earlier parts of the question?
Yeah. The pieces I'd add is, we're going through a crisis, and this is where character is born. And for as candidates, this is where you go to Glassdoor and you look at kind of what's there. It should always kind of be an 80-20, positive to negative sentiment, or somewhere thereabouts. You reach out to former employees and, see how you were treated when, or they were treated when they were there. You are who you are. I love being more transparent about all the things that you've done and are doing to stabilize and continue to stabilize the business, because stable business, there's no such thing. It's a Polaroid. So it's a constant or relentless pursuit to keep something stable. And so the more that you can kind of get them comfortable with that, the better. But I think it's the conversation is one where it's open book. We're going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you what we're doing. And you know what? Tomorrow you might have another question about what else are we going to do. And you know what? We'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
Yeah, one other point I just want to make, I know we're a little over, but it just came to mind as we're talking is, I think we probably all in recruiting have an unconscious bias with, if someone's in a job, they're a better candidate than someone who's job hunting. And I just want to make the point that, in this environment, that we should also really be, looking for those who are, have been laid off. Again, it's literally because of, the environment we're in. It's, most likely does not have anything to do with, their how good they are what at their job. So, I do think there's also this opportunity to pick up really amazing talent who, have unfortunately been let go from their current companies. So, it's an interesting versus someone who has a job. So I don't know, I just wanted to throw that out there. It's a really good time to actually pick up some great talent that you might not, would struggle with in the past if you're trying to steal them from a competitor or something.
Ryan's going to kill us if we continue to talk. For the audience, there is a number.
We are out of time. Yeah,
I know. There's a number of questions. So here's what we'll do. We'll roll these questions up and we'll answer them. And then we'll send that back out to everybody as well. Now, you're going to obviously get a copy of the recording, the slides and all that stuff. But all the questions that we didn't get to, A, thank you for asking. B, Jeanette and I will answer them. And then we'll get those to you as well. So thank you for, A, attending, and thank you for your participation.
Yes, thanks, everyone. Stay safe and healthy.
Wash your hands.
Don't touch your face.
And also, as you guys exit the session today, there will be a survey that comes up. Please take a moment, answer the survey question there as well. So thank you all for